By now, everyone has finished their drawing and we are ready to go on to our painting step. So, in Google Classroom for week 14, I have posted several different color wheels, and one looks like this. This is the one I'm going to talk about today, but all of the color wheels have this. Our main group of colors are our primary colors, and those are red, yellow, and blue. On this color wheel, you'll notice those colors are at the tip of the triangle. Those are the colors we cannot make. We have to start with that. And the other color pairs we're going to use are directly across, and those are our three secondary colors. So yellow, primary, I go across, and my secondary color is violet. If I start with red and I go directly across, my secondary color is green. My other primary color is blue, and if I come across the color wheel, the secondary color that matches up with blue is orange. So I want you to choose one of those three pairs. Or two, you'll have a little bit of a variation on that. And that's what we're going to use today. On this color wheel down here at the bottom, it says complementary. When we pair a primary with a secondary across from it, it is a complementary color. And you'll notice if we mix violet and yellow together in different amounts, we will get different colors. And that's what we're going to notice with our watercolor today. So you can keep that handy, or if you still have your color wheel from first semester handy, you can use that as well. Sometimes it's handy to keep a paper towel close by so that you can clean your tray. When our water gets dirty enough that it starts changing the colors, it is time to get new water. And you might also want to have an extra plate. This one is styrofoam, but you could use any kind of plastic plate or glass plate so that you can mix colors, or a lid from a container. Before I start to paint, though, I wanted to talk about one other thing, and that is when I was grading your drawings, I noticed that some of you were working on copy paper. So let's take a look at the difference. One difference is the copy paper is smaller than the watercolor paper, okay? Another difference is the copy paper is very light and thin, and if I touch it with my hand, it has a kind of a hard surface or a sheen to it, which makes it good for writing but not good for painting. The watercolor paper in your art bag is stiffer and it has a bit of a texture. It looks like almost not really like a waffle weave, but it has little marks on it, and you'll notice those marks or texture on both sides of your paper. This paper is what we want to be using for our painting, so please make sure that you are on watercolor paper, okay? Now, when I'm watercoloring, I can't pick up the painting when it's wet. So you'll notice I have my name on the back. If you're working at home, that's not so important because you're the only one doing watercolor at home. But if you're working in class, it's really important to have your name and period on the back. I am going to use, on this painting, I'm going to use the white wax, and I'm going to demonstrate on one of the objects here. You're not going to watch me paint the whole painting. And then I'm going to take my second painting and I'm going to choose a different object so we can hopefully be really clear about what I'm thinking about and what I want you to do. Okay, now I'm using the white wax to show my highlights on the object. Okay, so the tricky part is once I put the white wax on the watercolor paper, it's not going to show up until I've painted it. Thinking about my color wheel, I'm going to choose my favorite primary color, so I'm going to choose blue. And its complement, which we just looked at a couple minutes ago, and that is orange. So you'll notice I put those in two separate trays. Remember, in watercolor, we work light to dark. And I want to control how much water I have in my paint. So I'm going to mix my blue over here with some water, and then before I put it on my painting, I'm going to rinse my brush and take a little bit of orange and mix the two together, and I'm going to see the color change. If I wanted a little more blue, I can come back and add a little bit more blue, and then I'm going to pinch out the water because I don't want my brush super wet. We've divided our painting into sections with our ruler, and so now I want to stay inside my ruler divisions with my watercolor. So there is section number 1. When I'm dividing up my shape, I wanted to think about light and dark. And right here, I'm up against my wax. So I'm going to try to use my not so wet watercolor brush to paint inside the shape. So I don't want gobs of water. I want to be able to control where the watercolor goes. And if we think back to our watercolor technique page, remember what happened when we had two watercolor areas that were wet next to each other. They ran together. So now I have to let the area around this shape dry, the area around this shape dry, the area around this shape dry. So now I have to paint somewhere else. So I'm going to come back and get some orange and change the color. And again, I want to control how much water is in my paint, so I'm going to pinch some of that out. So my brush is pretty dry. And I'm going to paint. Because I'm using the color I started with as my base color, all of the colors will be related to each other. And I want to be sure I'm not painting across wet areas, so the easiest way to do that is to turn my paper around. And you'll notice that because I'm working on watercolor paper, some of the areas are dry, and also I'm using a color more than one time. So I'll use this color in a couple different places, which will help unify my painting. Okay, and I think it's time to change my color again. If the paint is or the paper is a little bit wet, I can leave a little island of paper between, so I am not touching the area. Or I could go to a different object. And work on painting one of my other objects. Now, even though we're working on watercolor paper, if I get the color really dark and let it sit, it's going to make an outline or a mark that I won't be able to change. So I don't want to just outline a shape and let the middle be empty. That's going to be important to fill the shape. Okay? I can maybe do one more shape, and then this is going to have to dry, so I'll work on the other painting and then come back to it. Okay, that's about as much as I can do. When watercolor paper is wet, it's going to be very, very shiny, so that tells me I need to wait. All right, we'll rinse the brush. Now I'm going to use a different set of colors, so that means it's time to clean the tray. Okay. So on this painting, I'm going to work on the bottle, okay? And so I'm going to choose this bottle, this jar or vase, used blue and orange as a complementary pair. So let's try red and green. I'm going to make this one red-orange. So for those of you that want a little bit more of a challenge, you could choose not a primary pair, but a red-orange or a yellow-orange. Okay, so let's go. I'm going with red. My main complement is going to be green. And since I have orange in my red-orange, that means I have to have this be blue-green. So that's going to be my complementary pair. Now on this one, I use the white wax. Here, I'm not going to use white wax. I'm going to paint around these highlight areas. So these are my highlights, and this is a highlight also. Remember that with watercolor, our number one thing is the transparency. So if I have, this bottle is pretty dark, so rather than having my highlights be white, I'm going to start by having them, and you'll notice I added quite a bit of water. So this is very pale and very transparent, a much lighter value than the color next to it. So this is going to be my highlight. And I want to unify my painting, so I'm going to paint all of my highlights with that same light value. That will help unify those. Okay, and this was my lighter side of the bottle. This was the medium value of the bottle, and this was the darker side of the bottle. So I'm not talking, this was the label shape. So I'm going to work on the bottle first. And I want to change the color a little bit. So how do I do that? I'm going to pull some of the color over here, some of the color from over here, and then I have to add some water. Now I have all of these empty areas or my extra plate. And then remember that we're going to pinch out some of the extra water because I want to be able to control how much water I have here. Otherwise, the painting is going to get pretty sloppy pretty quickly. If I have a bad hair day, I just use, if my brush is having a bad hair day, I just use my fingers to kind of tuck those hairs in. When I put my brush onto the paper, I can tell right away if I have too much water, if I'm going to be able to control it. If it's too wet, then stop what you're doing and pinch out the water, because we want to have our paintings be nice and neat. And again, I'm going to unify my painting by using some of the same wash that I created for this light area here. Now, watercolor sometimes goes on the paper differently. So even though I painted it as a flat wash, it kind of spread or changed a little bit, and that's totally fine. We want watercolor to be watercolor. Now I'm adding some of the complement over here. This is the dark side of my bottle. I don't want to be reaching across the wettest part of my painting, so I turn my paper. Oh, that's a nice rich dark. But remember, with watercolor, we want our darks to also still be transparent. So having that water balance is really tricky. And I need to control my brush, so I'm going to squeeze out some of the water and some of the paint. So that I can control where it is going and how much of it is going. It's a little bit too dry. Okay, there's a really nice rich dark. And I want to be sure that I have gone all the way up alongside my other values as close as I can get. I'm going to use some more of this dark down here on the darker bottom of the bottle. Maybe we'll use some of this up here at the top as well. So I'm really trying to control my painting. And this side is going to be very dark over here, so maybe we need a little bit more. And let's rinse the brush and use a little bit of our medium value here. Now, if I decide as my painting dries that I need a darker value, I can add another layer of wash, and it will show what's underneath, but still show what's on top. This I cannot paint yet because the sections around it need to dry, but now I'm going to use the combination of my complementary color here. It's a little bit too bright, so I'm going to put the complement in there for the label. And again, I want it to be wet enough so that the color moves, but if I'm having a hard time controlling it, I need to do what? I need to remove some water from my brush. And again, remember, transparency is the goal. And I can turn my paper. And after this is dry, I can decide if I want to separate the center of the label from the side. Now let's say I paint that and it's darker than I want. I can rinse my brush, pinch it out, and if the paper is wet, my brush will work a little bit like an eraser. And I can pick up some of that color if I want the label area to be lighter. So it's still the same color. And I can leave this, or I can come back and remove some of that color as well. I like that lighter color just a little bit better. And I think you can see the paper is shiny, so that has to dry, but I would finish the bottle in the same way. This could be a little bit close to the same, or could be a little bit different. Now I'm in dangerous territory because my label is still wet. So I'm going to leave a little bit of that edge there, and then I'll come back and kind of touch up that edge in a minute. And if the watercolor flows from one area into another, so the paper was a little bit wetter than you anticipated, that's not a big deal. That's what watercolor does, so no worries. Now if it flows together so much that we can't see your drawing or runs over the whole page, then that's a problem. If my paint starts to get a little bit dry, I can go dip my brush into my rinse water, as I just did. And I don't really want these lines in here, so let's see if we can get rid of those. And take care of this, paint that right up to that edge. Okay, so there we go. Now as it dries, the color is going to change a little bit, and I might have to come back and paint another wash on some of those areas or smooth them out. If I add water to my color, it's going to maybe be a little bit streaky. So if I don't want that, I just take water and just brush over that, and it should move the color around enough so that we don't get those outliney shapes, unless that's what you want. Okay, and if I have a little gap here, I can just add a little water there so I can overlap the edges a little bit. If one's dry, they'll sort of melt together. So I don't want to have gaps between the colors or areas of color, unless that's a highlight area. Okay, so that's pretty good. If I don't like this area those gaps, I can come back with a little water and just kind of flesh that out. All right, so there's a bottle, and here's a bottle. Now this one is dry, so we were using blue and orange. So I'm going to put my orange back over here that is just plain orange. And I'm going to put my straight blue over here. And remember to add water to both of those colors. And maybe in one or two places I will have just straight blue without any of the complementary color. Sort of like in comedy, you have sometimes a straight, what's called a straight man, so that they have somebody to bounce their act off of. And maybe we'll make this one the blue too over here. The more pure color or straight primary color wash gives a little spark. And now let's tone that down just a little bit. This was our darker side of the jar. And we're trying to unify our composition, so we'll use that same value or color in a couple of different areas. And then let's change it a little bit. That's on the top, so let's add a little more of the complement. And the complement neutralizes the color, so it makes the blue a little bit more orange or gray. Here's a place where the color has puddled. If I like that, I can leave that. Otherwise, I can brush that out just a little bit. Okay, now you maybe notice that one area has not been painted, and that's the area where this wire is. So when my painting is totally dry, I will come back with just a little bit of paint here, and I want this, I have to decide, is it going to be light or dark, and I'll just dip it in. And this part is pretty dry, so let me show you just a little bit here. So I'm just using the tip of the brush. And I'm just, now I also have wax there, so I'm not sure exactly how much is going to go on there. And so that might be a place where when it's dry, I fill in those details with pencil. Because once I have wax there, I'm not going to be able to put paint there because the wax resists the color. And that's why it's responding that way, because I have the wax there. And so that's the wire. Now that I've made the wire dark, I can see when this is dry, it will be better for me to come back and add another layer of wash that's a little bit different. They're too much the same. Okay, so that's what we're going to do on our objects. And so if I choose blue and orange, then I want to kind of stick with those pairs for certainly for this whole object, and maybe for two of the objects. I don't want a red object, a green object, and a blue object. That's not going to work. Okay, so we were going to try to unify our painting, so it's okay to vary it. Maybe since I chose blue and orange, maybe on this one, The silver pan is going to be mostly in the orange tones, but I am going to use the blue to make the shadows in the different sections. Okay. All right, so we are going to be working on this in class, and then you're going to finish it on your own, and it will not be due this week. It'll be due the following week. Okay. So, and that's because your paintings have to have time to dry. And so now that even this is not totally dry, but before I paint, if I was painting the toaster next, I would start on this other side. But I would say you're going to have to maybe wait 15 minutes to an hour between painting areas that touch each other to be able to control it so that it looks nice and stays put where you want it. Okay? All right. Happy painting.